Tell me your name, spell it, and give me your title.
Sure. My name is David Clark, David Clark. I am an author, tour guide, and presenter of programming about historical subjects. I've written the book Route 66 in Chicago, and I do walking tours and driving tours along Route 66.
Tell us a little about your walking tour and what someone on the tour will see.
Well, the walking tours are predominantly in downtown Chicago. We see the beginning of 66, where it ended if you're coming eastbound. We also look at the correlation between the commerce that it brought to Chicago, as well as all the architecture you see along the way, and the reasons for how Route 66 affected the growth of Chicago. So we see the history, we see the buildings, and we talk a lot about why Route 66 is where it is. Why did it start here?
Why did you start conducting walking tours?
Because I'm obsessed with history, and there are lots of folks who, when they came to Chicago, unfortunately didn't have much of a guide. They didn't know what to look at, where to find things. So Chicago was losing a lot of visitors who simply came to the city, didn't see much having to do with Route 66, and then they just left town. So I tried to fill that gap, and I started about 12 years ago with my first tours. And so I attract people through my website, WindyCityRoadWarrior.com, and they, look me up, ask to get a better idea of what's going on in Chicago's portion of 66, and I try to do the best I can to show them around.
When you answer the questions, try to answer them like in a complete sentence. I host walking tours because I'm obsessed with history.
Okay.
What made you want to write a book on the history of Route 66 in Chicago?
Well, the first book I wrote, Route 66 in Chicago, came about because I was contacted by the publisher, Arcadia Publishing, who had seen my website and also had read some of the articles I'd already written. And they felt that there was a market for such a book. And I was very happy to oblige because I agree there needs to be more information out there about the importance of what you see in Chicago to how the route developed.
Where does Route 66 officially start and end, and why was that location chosen?
Well, it started in Chicago. The Route 66 started in Chicago at the corner of Jackson Boulevard and Michigan Avenue, and that was chosen for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was chosen in Chicago to begin with because there is a connection between Chicago as the gateway to the west and the way west to Los Angeles, which was the commercial center of California. So there was a reason for a commerce flow between Chicago and LA. Now, why it started at Jackson and Michigan Avenue, that took me a long time to figure out. But it turns out that Jackson Boulevard didn't have any streetcars, so it made it easier for people to navigate in and out of Chicago on a street with no streetcars. Every other east-west street in downtown Chicago did have streetcars, and it would have been more difficult through traffic to get through. So that's why they picked Jackson Boulevard. Now, why it started at Michigan Avenue? They always wanted routes to meet up with each other, the U.S. highway system. So at Jackson Boulevard, it meets up with Michigan Avenue, and originally that was US 41, another important highway that went from Michigan, the state of Michigan, all the way down to Miami, Florida. So there was a meeting of the routes at the corner of Jackson and Michigan.
Which states does Route 66 run through?
Well, it starts here in Chicago. The people in California sometimes think it starts on their end, but that's not true. Route 66 starts in Chicago and runs through Missouri, all of Illinois, and then Missouri, a small part of Kansas, Oklahoma, the Texas Panhandle, New Mexico, Arizona, and then California.
For what purpose was Route 66 built?
Well, all of the U.S. highways, including Route 66, were built to make it possible for people to use the automobiles they were all building and actually get somewhere. Because in the 1920s, 93% of all rural roads were dirt, or when it rained, they were mud. So there had to be a network of hard roads in order for people to be able to use those new automobiles and actually spread the commerce, go see the country. In order to do that, there had to be a good, solid, hard road to do it. So all of the states got together and formed the U.S. Highway Association. Well, actually, the U.S. Highway System. And one of the original highways was Route 66. And it was the main thoroughfare bringing people from Chicago through the Southwest. It was the only way to go. So it was finally completed in all of its paving by 1938. And from then on, it was the main way to get from Chicago to California and back.
Tell us a little on how the interstate system affected Route 66.
Well, the interstate highway system came along in the mid-1950s, signed into law by Dwight Eisenhower. And the purpose of it was to create a safer, faster network of highways. And so one of the interstates that was picked was I-55, Interstate 55, which ran through Illinois along the same corridor generally that Route 66 did. So what the effect was when that interstate was completed, Route 66 was decommissioned. It became a former highway. It really wasn't there anymore as of 1977. So the interstate highway affected it by making it obsolete and by it actually becoming nothing but a historic memory. This continued in the other states as the interstates were built across the country, I-44, I-40, etc., all along the corridor that had been Route 66. By 1985, every state along the way had decommissioned the highway. And so that led to the historic resurgence with people who really still wanted to travel that way, got together and started marking the route and advertising that they were still out there. All you have to do is get off the super slab and come see us. So it did have a lot of effects on Route 66.
Is there any practical use of Route 66 today?
Is there a practical use of Route 66 today? Yes, of course there is, because in many places it's still a used pavement, it's a used highway. It's still, Jackson Boulevard and Adams Street in downtown Chicago are very busy streets. Ogden Avenue is a very busy street. So yes, on two fronts, it's still very viable. One is as a local route in all the areas it goes through, in many cases, and the other is it's a tourism magnet. Lots of folks come from all over the country and world to get their kicks on Route 66 to this day.
Why do you think Route 66 has developed such a cult following?
So there's a cult following for Route 66, and there's probably several reasons for that. One, of course, is that it has such a bond with the culture of the country. It was used during the Dust Bowl years for people escaping their useless farms in the middle of the country and to go to California, to the Promised Land. So they used the 66 to get there. It was used during World War II as a main route of moving troops and moving supplies across the country. It was used by vacationing families during the boom of the 1950s. People were getting their kicks on 66 by driving their Chevrolets to see the USA, and seeing America best by car was another slogan that they were using in those days. And of course, it's pretty important, that song I just been saying, Get Your Kicks on 66. It became a major hit from Nat King Cole in 1946, and it's kind of added more of an aura to this particular highway as the way to see the country.
Who designed Buckingham Fountain?
Who designed it? Who designed Buckingham Fountain? The person who designed Buckingham Fountain was Edward Bennett. He was a partner of Daniel Burnham. He was one of the writers of the 1909 Plan of Chicago. The fountain was built in 1927, And so it's been a kind of a fitting symbol of the beginning of Route 66 ever since 66 was in existence here in Chicago. After all, it's a celebration of Lake Michigan, and which is, on the banks of Lake Michigan, on the shores, is where 66 begins, and then it ends on the other end near the Pacific Ocean. So there's a connection to the waterways all along the highway. It also crosses the Mississippi River. So the connection of water to road is very significant, and it's nice to have good old Buckingham Fountain here on the Chicago end to kind of make that connection.
What is the inspiration behind Buckingham Fountain's design?
Well, the Buckingham Fountain was first of all commissioned by Kate Buckingham, who was a heiress here in Chicago, to commemorate her son Clarence Buckingham. Clarence had died young, and she wanted to commemorate him, so she donated the money for building the fountain to the city, as well as money for its upkeep. The fountain itself was based upon a design of a fountain in Versailles in France, but it's actually almost double the size of the original in France.
When was the Board of Trade building built?
So one of the things you can see along 66 in Chicago is the Chicago Board of Trade building. The current building was built in 1929 on the site of the previous building. It is an Art Deco masterpiece by the architects Halliburton Root. It also was, during most of its early years, 1929 to the mid-1950s, the tallest building in Chicago. And so, as a connection to 66, among many others, it's important for commerce, which 66 is, so there's a connection there. But it's also where tourists came, because as the tallest building, it's where the observatory was. If you wanted to look out the tallest building's windows, you'd go to the Board of Trade, you'd pay a ticket to get on the elevator, and up you'd go to the tallest point in Chicago at the time. So this was right during the heyday of 66, so it was there, right on the highway, and a tourist destination.
How did Route 66 help local farmers determine the price of their commodities?
So early on in the history of Illinois agriculture, Illinois agriculture, it was often the practice of farmers to negotiate bag by bag the value of their wheat, their corn, their whatever. So it really started with the railroad era, that they would start shipping their goods to the market in Chicago, which was the Board of Trade. And there at the Board of Trade, it would be what's known as commoditized. It was graded by its quality, and then they could negotiate the price based upon its grade here in Chicago. So as Route 66 is built, instead of always using the railroads to transport those goods, they can be taken by truck as well, trucked into the markets wherever they may be, including the biggest one, and that was in Chicago.
What statues sit outside the Board of Trade building, and what do they represent?
So outside the Board of Trade building here in Chicago now are two statues, marble statues, and they represent industry and agriculture, and they used to stand above the door of the old Board of Trade building, which was torn down in 1929 to make room for the newest one. Now these statues originally were removed from the building by, most likely by a gentleman named Andrew Cutton when it was demolished, the old building, and taken to his estate out in Downers Grove, which when he passed away became a forest preserve. They laid in the grass in the forest preserve for many years, completely forgotten, until somebody mowing the grass found them and wondered what they were. They figured out what they came from. And so in 2005, they were returned to the Board of Trade Plaza for us to enjoy and look at.
When was Douglas Park built, and who was it named after?
So there are a ring of parks around what used to be the edge of Chicago, and one of those, 66 runs through, Ogden Avenue runs through, and it's Douglas Park. Douglas Park was named for Stephen A. Douglas. He was the man who Abraham Lincoln defeated for the presidency back in 1860, but he was also a senator from Illinois for many years. So they named the park after him. The park was built in beginning in 1869. The landscape architect originally who built it was William LeBaron Jenney, who started the first landscaping of Douglas Park. He would go on to create the world's first skyscraper in Chicago. So he was an important early architect. But the Douglas Park we see today is more influenced by a gentleman who came along in the 1920s, starting in 1909, but more significantly in the 1920s. His name is Jens Jensen. He was the park district's in the West Parks, their landscape architect for many, many years. So he's the one who brought in the current look of it, including all the prairie-style buildings that are scattered about Douglas Park.
Why was Douglas Park built, and what purpose does it serve today?
Douglas Park and all the other parks that ring around Chicago were built because the city had no money to create green space back in the 1860s. So the state stepped in, and through legislation down in Springfield, they created the the park systems of Chicago. And there were three: the Lincoln Park system, the West Park system, and then the South Park system. And the demarcation, the divisions between these systems was based upon the river. So everything north and east of the Chicago River to the lake, that was Lincoln Park. Everything between the two branches of the river to the west, that was the West Parks. And these districts were given the ability to function much like a city would. They were given the power to take land, to tax property taxes, and so the idea was to create much needed green space in what was a very terribly overpopulated city. Create places for people to have recreation. And so it began then, and it still serves the same function now. People use them to escape their work and go have a nice day in the parks, have barbecues, picnics, use the facilities that are in the park buildings. So they serve pretty much the same purpose, just more updated and upgraded.
When was the Art Institute built, and what was the building originally used for?
Okay, so the Art Institute is at the beginning of Route 66 near Adams and on Adams and Michigan Avenue. So this is westbound Route 66 today. So the Art Institute is a symbol of Chicago. It was built in 1893, the current building. At least the front part of it was. And it was originally tied to the Columbian Exposition of that same year, the World's Fair. The first use of the building was as a conference center and visitor center for people coming from all around the world to see the fair. They would come into downtown Chicago on the trains, and they would get a room at a downtown hotel. Well, they were miles and miles away from the fair, so that night they would go on over to get a taste of it at the Art Institute building. So when the fair was over, is when the Art Institute moved in. So it had always been built for that purpose. It was always going to be the home of the Art Institute, but it had just one other purpose at first, and that that was temporary.
How was the Art Institute affected by the fire of 1871, and how was it renovated?
Well, I don't know all the details of that. I don't believe the Art Institute existed as an institution yet in 1871. I'd have to look that one up. But they did have a different home at first when they were first started, and the building still exists just further south on Michigan Avenue. So it was repurposed as an office building when the Art Institute moved out and into their current structure. So that happened in 1893, as I said. But before that, the 1886, I believe it was where they probably were started. So no, I don't think there was any connection between the Art Institute and the 1871 fire.
Tell us the history of Castle Car Wash.
Okay, well, one of the things you can see along Route 56 in Chicago today, at Ogden Avenue and Hamlin Avenue, is an old structure that originally was a Standard Oil gas station. It was built in 1925 by a gentleman named John J. Murphy. And it was one of dozens of gas stations along Ogden Avenue. So what he did to make it stand out and look like something people would want to visit, he made it look like a castle. Now in those days, gasoline was selling for, I think, 6 gallons for $1. Everybody was selling it for the same basic price. So you needed something that would help you stand out from the crowd, and thus he built the castle. What's wonderful about it is it's the only, there's plenty of gas stations and service stations along Route 56, all along the 8 states, that have interesting architecture to catch your eye. But we have the only castle along the whole highway. There are no others. So it was used by Mr. Murphy as his business, as a standard gas station, until the 1960s. So it was over 40 years that he ran it successfully. Then as the interstates were built, the traffic reduced, he decided to retire. It was used for several different purposes over the years, the last one being the car wash, that some people still call it the Castle Car Wash. I prefer to call it the Castle Gas Station. But recently it was restored, the facade was restored somewhat to make it look more like its original appearance, and all that paint that used to be on there that said Castle Car Wash was removed. So it looks much nicer now. Unfortunately, it's still sitting vacant, but at least it's still there, a reminder of earlier times on the highway.
Are there any plans to renovate Castle Car Wash?
There were plans, unfortunately, there were plans to renovate the castle, but they've been put on hold due to the owner of it having an illness. So he, I believe, still has plans to try to turn it into a carry-out fast food restaurant.
Why is Castle Car Wash a Hall of Fame landmark?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Why is Castle Car Wash a Hall of Fame landmark?
It isn't. It isn't. Can we skip that one? Because it isn't.
Is it?
No, it's not.
We were on the Pontiac website.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, they commemorate it, but it really hasn't been elected into the Hall of Fame.
okay.
All right.
Okay. What makes Henry's Hot Dogs a Route 66 attraction?
So along the highway, there's lots of wonderful fast food restaurants and diners. One exists here in Cicero, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, called Henry's Drive-In. And it is a classic roadside diner or fast food joint because, again, to catch your eye, what they did was they created a huge fiberglass hot dog and stuck it on their sign out front. So it says a meal in itself on the sign, and it's been attracting people in to enjoy their fine food ever since they put it up in the 50s. Well, my only complaint is that the hot dog on the sign is not the actual size of the hot dogs they serve inside.
How many people visit Henry's Hot Dogs and where do they come from?
So Henry's Hot Dogs is still very popular. People come from all over to eat there and take pictures. I really don't know how many people come, in a given week or day or whatever, but it's certainly significant enough traffic to keep them going after all these years.
When was Lou Mitchell's built and how did it become so famous?
There is another wonderful diner along 66 in Chicago called Lou Mitchell's. They've been in business on Jackson Boulevard, the same block, since 1923. And one of the reasons it's still so popular is, first of all, its location right on Route 66. It's right down the street from Union Station, so all the people who come through there commuting or getting off a train from across the country on Amtrak have a wonderful place to eat so close to where they're going. And the main reason it still attracts people, besides its location and long history, is that they still do things the old-fashioned way. They still cook wonderful food, good basic coffee, no lattes in sight. And the people who own it now are just dedicated to keeping everything the way it always has been. Fresh food served daily, attention to detail for customers, and keeping it going the same way that the founder had when he started it.
What notable people have eaten at Lou Mitchell's?
Many people come to Lou Mitchell's to eat from all over. Some famous ones include Barack Obama. I'm not sure of a list of everybody else because it would be a long, long list. I know a few years ago that the CNN morning news team was doing their broadcasts from Union Station. And so all of the people who worked for their morning news were all in there eating. But I'm sure anybody who knows about it that is on the highway has gone there at least for a visit, if not to eat some food.
What are your favorite dishes to eat at Lou Mitchell's?
So the menu at Lou Mitchell's is long and varied. Many of the things there are classic diner food. But one thing I love is their double yolk eggs for breakfast. They claim that they have a special set of hens that all of them only lay eggs that have double yolks. In actuality, when you order a single egg, they're just giving you two, and if you order 2 eggs, they're giving you 4. So it keeps the illusion alive. So one thing to remember when you're going to Lou Mitchell's is if you don't want to overeat, if you only want 2 eggs, just order 1, and you'll get 2 anyway. So yes, but the breakfasts are the best thing there.
If someone wanted to tour Route 66, how do they learn about all these secret gems?
For somebody to tour Route 66, they need either a good guidebook, which there are several on the market, or some tour type people such as myself or the folks down in Pontiac, which do a wonderful job as well. Because it was decommissioned as a highway, there are places where you'll just never be able to find it without knowing, from a book or from a person exactly where to turn and what to do. So there are many options for finding out things about Route 66 all across the country. Visiting the museums is one great way, as well as simply if you do a Google search on Route 66, you'll come up with many things. Every one of the states has their own state association of volunteers that maintain websites. So there's lots of places for people to get information. The important thing is simply to get that information before you start driving, so you know what you're doing.
Is that it? Sweet.
How'd I do?
That was awesome. Thank you.
You only tripped me up